This is a new presentation, one I haven't given before. It's about fake news, and like every other presentation, it's like something that grows on you, and it can either be an ugly baby or a beautiful baby. It will depend. So there's a lot of information here, and some of that I will have to quote it straight out of what I've written here. And just to start this theme off, the fake news was a phrase, was named the word of the year. Actually, it's a phrase. But every year, the dictionaries, the famous Collins Dictionary, is adding a new word. For example, in the past we had Brexit, and that was added in our dictionary, right? And so in 2017 we added this one, the fake news, because of course it was massive. Everybody was quoting it. Ever since the presidential election of 2016 with Donald Trump, right? Everybody heard this phrase and started using it. And so it has been defined in Collins Dictionary as false, often sensational information disseminated under the guise of news reporting. Okay? And ever since, we've seen other political leaders like Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn quoting this phrase, and they start including it into their speeches. Now, how did the story, if you like, the history of fake news began? Well, it started in a little place called Macedonia, which is a small country created after the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 90s. And in 2016, many journalists and people who work for media in the US started seeing an influx of, or a stream if you like, of very crazy themes on news items on Facebook and other social media websites. And they were all coming from the same place, a place called Velis, or it's a city, a very small city in Macedonia. And basically there was like a cluster of about 140 fake news websites that they were pulling huge numbers on Facebook, okay? And this, basically it was a group of young men or young people who were trying to make money on Facebook advertising, and they were using these websites as a way to, if you like, attract attention from people who were looking for news for what was going on during or right before the elections of 2016. Now, so it was this Trump election that triggered this phenomenon. And it was a very hot topic on social media. And so the Macedonians and now the purveyors of these fake news stories came up with headlines like Pope Francis shocks the world, endorses Donald Trump for president. Yeah. Or another one was FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. Another one. Yeah. So these were completely false, and in this way began this modern internet-friendly life of fake news, as a phrase. Now, because this phrase, because of what happened in the American elections, was like a shocking result to see Donald Trump, somebody who's completely out of the mainstream politics of US, winning the elections. And not only that, the mass media, right, they couldn't find a way why they failed to support really their own candidate, that was Hillary Clinton. They found a scapegoat, and this scapegoat was fake news. And for the first time in history, we had this alignment of misinformation, spin, deceit, and also on online media, that there was this unique marriage with social media algorithms advertising systems and people prepared to make stuff to earn money during that election. Fake news endorsed by everyone to explain anything they don't agree with. So ever since, we've seen everyone using this expression for basically anything that they don't like. So the phrase now evokes much more than just this get-rich-quick scheme of these Macedonian teenagers. Even if you pay attention to news, President Trump gave fake news awards to reporters who had many errors or poor predictions, with a special note to all reporting on the ongoing and very real investigations into collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. But to say that President Trump was the first politician, right, to deploy the term would itself be fake news, because we saw also Hillary Clinton doing the same. In actual fact, she quoted saying that the epidemic of malicious fake news and false propaganda that flooded social media over the past year clearly now shows that fake news can have real-world consequences. That's what she said. And she said also this isn't about politics or partisanship. Lives are at risk, lives of ordinary people just trying to go about their days, to do their jobs, contributing to their community. So she also got behind this fake news and tried to use it. Now, Trump accused media of being fake news. And you've seen that recently so many times. He will use this phrase. And in January 2017, a little over a week before taking office, he used this phrase. And in response to a question, he said, "You are fake news" to CNN reports. And many times you see him do that all the time. "You're fake news, you're fake news." And this is his way of addressing people that, of course, they dislike him, the mass media, but at the same time trying to create this wall between him and the media community. So, and also, you know his famous Twitter account. He's using his Twitter account to communicate with his voting base. And ever since he used the word in that Twitter account, many other websites and social websites have taken it off as an okay thing to do, to use it themselves as well. So, experts say that highly educated people can be tricked by lies as well. It's not just people who haven't got much information or education. And can often these highly educated men or women can be very stubborn when presented with information that challenges their views. But within months, this sheer ubiquity of the phrase fake news had perhaps lost all its all this meaning. So all sorts of things, misinformation, spin, conspiracy theories, mistakes, and reporting that people just don't like has been rolled into this kind of term. And I'm just going to go to two individuals that are in the business of finding out what kind of impact social media and news stories have on our lives and our voting habits. One of them is Alexios Mangalis, who is the director of the Pointer Institute's International Fact-Checking Network. And he had this to say as regards this taking on the term fake news. "We did this to ourselves, and by we mean the media. And right after the election..." Sorry, "in editorials, in news articles, we started calling fake news a bit of everything," he said. Okay? "We should be conscious that our industry is partly to blame for the confusion we're at. And some experts with huge experience in the field have started to back away from fake news fire altogether." Now, another individual who's in the same business of analyzing the impact of these news feeds on social media platforms is Claire Wardle of First Draft News. And she said that the reason I don't like the phrase now is it's used as a term to describe everything, whether it is a sponsored post, an ad, a visual meme, a bot on Twitter, a rumor. People just use it against any information they don't like. And this is a real complex problem, she said. If we're going to start thinking of ways we can intervene, we're going to have clear definitions. And that's the problem, isn't it? You can't use fake news as a way to describe anything that you don't like. That's the main problem. You have to find a definition of what it is. And Wardle says that an obsession with a phrase is actually hurting the credibility of otherwise credible news outlets. And she said, my concern now is the kind of reporting we see on disinformation. People are saying, I don't know who to believe or who to trust. Everything is broken. And my concern is the way that we're talking about some of these issues is actually doing more than the original misinformation did in the first place. So what happened after these events, after the events of the shocking event of the election in the United States, the fake news becoming mainstream, as mainstream phrase, social media companies started taking measures. And I think in the future, we're going to see the term fake news as a relic of 2017. But the fight against misinformation won't go away. Companies and governments are now starting to take concrete actions, the consequence of which will be felt in the short term. And of course, we know two of the big, massive internet companies that deal with news feeds is Google and Facebook, and have both said that they are going to be hiring a lot of people to review content and enforce the terms of service and keep fake and illegal stuff off the platform. So I'm interested to see how they're actually going to do that. The obscure way these platforms operate and their power and the fact that so much speech has moved on to them is something that we need to pay attention and make sure that we don't turn them from places where misinformation is running rampant to places that are so locked down that they're inhibiting speech. So after they came out saying they're going to take measures, these internet companies, these mass media, if you like, social media companies, we had also governments coming out saying that they're going to take measures. So alongside worries about the power of social media, companies, the experts also have concerns about the power of governments, as we will expand more on that later, because there have been many governments, especially in the West, that they try to inhibit free speech by trying to legislate fake news. Now, sometimes it so happens that well-intentioned but ill-informed legislators will overreach and do more harm than the problem they're trying to fix with legislation of fake news. So now most people will call that an unfortunate mistake. But as we know very well in the alternative media community, we call it Hegelian dialectic. They let a problem to get to an exasperated measure and effect, and then they come in as the saviors with measures that we wouldn't have accepted in the first place. Okay, and that's the Hegelian dialectic. So they let this problem of these Macedonian youngsters exasperate with this fake news, and they're coming in to basically restrict free speech with new laws. So what is the actual, though, impact of this fake news on voters, apart from the hype? You know, whenever you see any major media channel, they will say that the fake news have destroyed voters' minds and the way that they vote. But what is the actual effect? Have there been any studies? So the essential question is, what impact does misinformation really have in the mind of voters? So ever since the debate over the issue really took of a little over a year ago, there's been enormous disagreement as to whether false stories spread online actually have any impact on people's politics or voting patterns. So here's the study. In one of the first academic studies about the consumption of fake news, researchers at Princeton, Dartmouth, and the University of Exeter estimate that about 25% of Americans visited a fake news website in a 6-week period around the time of the elections. 25%, which is a quarter of the voters, right? But the researchers also found that the visits were highly concentrated. What that means? 10% of the readers made 60% of the visits. Okay? So, and crucially, then the researchers conclude that fake news doesn't crowd out hard news consumption. So the reach was relatively wide, but not too deep.
Excuse me, can I just ask a question?
Is it all right if we leave it at the end?
Oh, right.
Yeah, sorry.
I might forget.
Okay. So the reach was relatively wide, but not so deep. So it's quite a big step further to say, are people voting on this, making decisions on it? So it is to say basically that this is poisoning our democracy, fake news, or you won't vote for this guy or the other guy, all right, on these elections because of something you read which is fake news. It's not credible. It needs more research and more data. That comes straight out of the mouth of researchers, right? People who are getting paid to find out what the result is or the impact is on us. So don't believe the politicians when they come out and they say fake news have impact on us. The research shows the exact opposite. So that's where we reach the point where, as you know, this is something recent of Alex Jones, okay? On the back of this fake news, there was a clampdown on basically anyone who they consider to be an extremist voice, including, I think the most vociferous of them all, Alex Jones. So the ban of Alex Jones, it wasn't just, I don't think it was just a bad thing, it was a catastrophe. Many argue that big social platforms are businesses and they do not have to be forced to provide a platform for speech that they detest. And I think that's fine. No one argues with that. But they bit more than they can actually chew. They've decided that they will basically become ethically responsible for all the content they provide. And this is a mass content. Yes, this is just a mass amount of information that they have accumulated over time from so many people. It's basically impossible to legislate and look after all this content. So the truth is that these companies initially were set up in a way that people could post content, and then other people could watch it and decide by their viewing they could value the content by their liking to view. But now these big social media companies have decided, as a consequence of this decision, they're going to be in the business of arbitrarily determining what is true and what is false. And I think they shouldn't pretend that they can actually do that if that's impossible. So a lot of people were watching Alex Jones, and they didn't necessarily agree with everything he had to say. I mean, I watched him every now and then just to find out what the radical conspiratorial right wing of the movement has to say. But this is not possible anymore because he has been taken out of their platforms. And he went underground almost overnight because all the major platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Google decided to take him out of the way. So on the surface, it looks right to do so. That is to terminate anyone on the platform that doesn't abide by the terms and conditions. And Alex Jones sounded for a long time to many people as paranoid. And the worst thing to do to somebody who is paranoid, I'm not saying that he's paranoid, right, is to persecute them. And I think that was an ill-advised thing to do. Alex Jones was always talking about conspiracy theories of one thing or the other. And if you remember, he was talking about conspiracy of the major social media companies as conglomerates taking on him. And that's exactly what happened. So now people pay more attention to him than they used to pay in the past. And although he became overnight more, if I dare say, more credible, okay, another thing also happened. He also disappeared, okay? Because he was taken out of all the social media platforms, the only thing that was left to him was to carry on underground. And in fact, there is a group on Facebook, which is private at the moment, Infowars group, and it has about 110,000 members, where you can see all different stories that Alex Jones was promoting. But the fact is that the traffic that he used to attract has halved ever since his censorship. So you can basically, in this new era of the 21st century, you can just delete somebody overnight and has an impact on the way that they used to say things and the way he used to relate with other people. So what is the other problem? Who owns the media? In many ways, the reason we find ourselves in this situation is because the established media has stopped being a beacon of truth and objective journalism. And like all reliable watchdogs, the media are expected to bark, but when many faced it, voice is owned by a small number of corporate masters, concerns about his willingness to keep barking arise. And I'll take as an example US, because there we see clearly the trend of what happened with the mass media and the way they have been voicing out the truth of or what's really happening in the world. In 1983, 50 corporations controlled most of the American media, including magazines, books, music, news feeds, newspapers, TV, radio, and movies. But by 1992, that number had dropped by half. And by 2000, only 6 corporations had ownership of most media. And that is GE News Corporation, News Corporation, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. Only 6 out of 50. That was only a few decades ago. Okay? So, with markets branching rapidly into international territories, these few companies are increasingly responsible for deciding what information is shared around the world. And actually, there's only few now left in the US, which are smaller companies and more like independent voices, if you like. And that is the New York Times, which is owned by the publicly held New York Times Corporation, the Washington Post, which is owned by the publicly held Washington Post Company, and the Chicago Tribune and Los Angeles Times. They are both owned by Tribune Company. Now, there is a man called Ben Begdigian, who is a Pulitzer winner journalist, and he said that these 6 actually form a cartel that wields enough influence to change US politics and define social values. And that was the story about the mass media and how they came to be from 50 to 6 only conglomerates. And if you remember, especially after the mid-90s, the internet started picking up. We saw so many different websites coming along, especially news sites, okay? And at the beginning, the internet was seen as the champion of free thinkers and embraced as a liberating force for corporate-owned media. But over time, even online news sites joined radio, television, newspapers, and magazines as properties of the small handful of these original media conglomerates. So what we have now, instead of having these free thinkers and free voices of the beginning of the internet, 80% of the top 20 online news sites are owned by the 100 largest media companies. So I'll give you a small example. Time Warner owns 2 of the most visited sites, CNN.com and AOL News. while Gannett, who is the 12th largest media company, owns USA Today, along with many local online newspapers. And this Bagdigian I quoted earlier, who's a Pulitzer winner journalist, he said, what we see is the narrowing of voices or choices, because that removes from voters the full spectrum of views and information with which to choose its government. And it is a dangerous trend that threatens democracy itself. So first, the internet companies attracted in these users by pretending to be open places for discussion or neutral venues and services, and now they close the trap. Okay. So by 2016, after becoming essentially monopolies, these now internet companies, such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, and others, helped by the deep state establishment, especially in the US, they began to roll out full-blown censorship and surveillance while manipulating what people and users see. And in short, companies such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Google, and many more, deceived their users. And now they think that they are indispensable, don't they, for humanity, and unstoppable. They shut the trapdoor with their opposition like Alex Jones looking in from outside. So we are facing really a reality that the big government and big tech colliding together to manipulate humanity and promote propaganda that's becoming more obvious as the time goes on. But accumulating power on only just a few conglomerates is not the only problem why there is this void where fake news can come in. There's also another problem. I think it's the algorithms that over the past few years have taken over the whole world and they rule our lives. You see, when you browse online for a new pair of shoes, pick a movie to stream on Netflix, or apply for a car loan, an algorithm likely has its word to say on the outcome. So the complex mathematical formulas are playing a growing role in all walks of life, including the news sites, okay? From detecting skin cancers to suggesting new Facebook friends, deciding who gets a job, how police resources are deployed, who gets insurance, at what cost, and who gets a mortgage at what kind of interest. So when it comes to news and information algorithms that are being used today, experimentally so far, they can actually be used, these algorithms, to write articles from raw data. That's where we are in time. So that is why Donald Trump's presidential campaign was accused for having been helped by behavioral marketeers who used an algorithm to locate the highest concentration of persuadable voters. But while such automated tools can inject a measure of objectivity into previously subjective decisions, fears arising over the lack of transparency algorithms can entail, with pressure growing to apply standards of ethics or accountability. And I think that's where the heart of the matter lies here. Data scientists caution about our blindly trusting algorithms to determine a fair outcome. Algorithms are not inherently fair because they are numbers and maths, because the person who builds them is the one injecting them with his bias and can in some extent influence their set of results. So the secrecy, the complexity, and the lack of understanding of this general public about algorithms is what provides a fair ground for manipulation and control. In the following video, we see how algorithms decide what news we see. In this video, a Facebook employee explains how algorithms are used to filter out fake news and what determines their result.
People post a lot of things on Facebook. Actually, the average person has thousands of things on any given day that they could read in their newsfeed. My name is Adam, and I look after Newsfeed at Facebook. And our mission on Newsfeed is to connect people with the stories that matter to them most. And to do this, we use a tool called ranking. Ranking is a set of algorithms that we use to try to assess how interested people are in each and every story that they could see on Facebook. So what is an algorithm? Simply put, it's a formula or a set of steps for solving a particular problem. It's a little abstract. So maybe a real-world example. Let's say I'm waiting for my wife Monica at a restaurant and she's running late. And I have to order her something because she texts me and asks me to do so. At that moment, I have a problem to solve. I have to figure out what to order Monica for lunch. And we can actually break that problem down into steps. The first thing I would do would be to check what's on the menu, because I can't very well order something that's not available at the restaurant. Then, I'd consider all of the information I have available to try to make a good decision. Things like, does she tend to like fish, or does she not like burgers? Is it lunchtime or dinner time right now? What's good at this restaurant? What did she have for lunch yesterday? And then from there, I'd actually make a prediction. I'd essentially estimate the likelihood that she'd be happy with the fish or the chicken soup. And in ranking, we have names for these steps. The first, we call inventory. What's on the menu? In Newsfeed, the menu is the stories that you have not seen from your friends and from the publishers that you've decided to follow. The second we call signals, the information we have available to make informed decisions. Signals are things like how old a given story is, or who posted it. Even little things like how fast your internet connection is right now, or what kind of phone you're on. And we rely on signals and, in a large way, feedback from our community to understand what content might be problematic. Maybe it's violent content, or spam, or clickbait, or false news. And we use all of these signals to try to make informed predictions, which is the third step. Predictions are things like how likely are you to comment or share a given story? How likely are you to hide or report a story? And then we take those few dozen predictions and we weight them and roll them up into a relevancy score, a number that represents how interested we think you are in any given story in your inventory. And then we order stories by those scores. We do this for each and every person who uses Facebook, for every story that's in their inventory, every time they come to Newsfeed. And because recency is an important signal, Newsfeed is lightly chronological, but not strictly so. And we know we're not perfect and that we make mistakes, which is why we're constantly iterating and trying to get better at connecting people with the stories that matter to them most. And that, in a nutshell, is how Newsfeed works.
So I don't know whether the last thing he said was we control, because we're not perfect, we can't always decide what's the right thing. Because sometimes an algorithm will be given a choice that there's more than one right answer. So that's what they're coming in with their bias to infiltrate the algorithm in a way that will show only stories or news feeds that they like you to see, not the ones that you will probably more inclined towards. So
That's a lot of things.
There was that lady who wrote this book some time ago, Weapons of Mass Destruction. And her name is Kathleen O'Neill. You can find the book on Amazon. It was published in 2016. And she argues that while some algorithms may be helpful, others can be actually nefarious. I'll give you a small example as it comes out of the United States. In public schools in Washington in 2010, they fired more than 200 teachers, including several well-respected instructors, based on scores in an algorithm formula which evaluated performance. Okay? So they can eliminate you overnight with their formulas. Second example, a man diagnosed with a bipolar disorder was rejected for employment at 7 major retailers after the third-party personality test deemed him a high risk based on its algorithmic classification. Yeah? A third one, many jurisdictions are using predictive policing to shift resources to likely hotspots. And O'Neill, that writer, says that depending on how data is fed into the system, this could lead to the discovery of more minor crimes and a feedback loop which stigmatizes poor communities. The fourth one is some courts rely on computer-ranked formulas to determine jail sentences and parole, which may discriminate against minorities by taking into account risk factors such as their neighborhoods and friends or family links to crime. So if you have a friend who is a criminal, you have to think twice, because there are algorithms out there who can actually downgrade you when it comes to benefits. In the world of finance, the fifth example is brokers scrape data from online and other sources in new ways to make decisions on credit or insurance. This too often amplifies prejudice against the disadvantaged, O'Neill argues. So her findings were echoed in a White House report last year, warning that algorithmic systems are not infallible. They rely on the imperfect inputs, logic, probability, and the people who designed them. So the White House has actually taken action when it comes to we live in a society where you started talking in parliaments about algorithms, okay? So the report noted that data systems can ideally help weed out human bias, but warned against algorithms systematically disadvantaging certain groups. And that's the thing. We live in a society that algorithms can be designed in a way that will disadvantage specific groups. And we know which ones these are, aren't we? And if you talk against the system, eventually in the future, they will disadvantage you as a group. Now, another one is this digital crumbs. You probably heard this effect before. It's the Hansel and Gretel effect, which is this hidden trail of digital breadcrumbs that we leave when we search the internet. And this professor, Zeynep Tufekci at the University of North Carolina, who studies technology and society, said automated decisions are often based on data collected about people, sometimes without their knowledge. These computational systems can infer all sorts of things about you from your digital crumbs. They can infer your sexual orientation, your personality traits, and even your political leanings. They have predictive power with high levels of accuracy. And such insights may be useful in certain contexts, such as helping medical professionals diagnose depression, but unfair they can be also unfair in others. So part of the problem, she said, stems from asking computers to answer questions that have no single right answer. They are subjective, open-ended, and value-laden questions asking who the company should hire, which update from which friend should you be shown, which convict is more likely to reoffend. So what I'm trying to say basically about these algorithms, just because they have designed a system where they show you news feeds, it doesn't mean that they can't control the system itself. They said that they don't control it. They said that it's impartial because what they're building is built in maths and numbers, but they have the power to infiltrate the system with their bias. And we found that out recently because somebody sent a video from a meeting that the high officials of Google had straight after the election of Donald Trump. And there they admit that they can actually manipulate the system in a way that they will make sure this thing will not happen again. So if you want to know what these creators, the creator of these algorithms that control the news that reach to us online think of us, the ones who don't believe in the New World Order, that don't believe in big media conglomerates and other well-known issues, then all you have to see is this video of the Google top officials discussing, and I think this is a long 1 hour video on YouTube, but I saved you only 5 minutes highlights that shows their deceit.
Most people here are pretty upset and pretty sad because of the election.
It did feel like a ton of bricks dropped on my chest.
Trump specifically, who I know many of us find very offensive.
And I've had a chance to talk to a lot of fellow Googlers, and people have said different words, similar concept, how painful this is.
I find so many things that Trump has said very offensive.
There is a lot of fear within Google.
I'm seeing Googlers who are full of fear.
There are people who are very afraid.
They're full of fear about the future.
I certainly find the selection deeply offensive, and I know many of you do too. It's a very stressful time, and it conflicts with many of our values. Immigrants or minorities, women,
Blacks, people who are afraid based on religion, the LGBTQ community.
I would just advise us all to be calm.
Because of Google's huge presence on the internet, Facebook and Google accounting for 99% of all digital ad revenue growth in 2017 in the US, there's already been speculations in the past of Google having a political bias, a left-leaning skew, withholding or censoring information that doesn't go along with the pre-approved narrative that Google is trying to push onto the population.
I think what Google and what others are doing, if you look at what's going on at Twitter, if you look at what's going on in Facebook, they better be careful, because you can't do that to people. You can't do it. We have literally thousands and thousands of complaints coming in, and you just can't do that. So I think that Google and Twitter and Facebook, they're really treading on very, very troubled territory, and they have to be careful. It's not fair to large portions of the population.
For the second part of our presentation, just based on what we just heard from that little video that was recorded unbeknown to the CEOs of Google and was sent to a news media website, right? If you listen to the whole video, you will find them saying stuff like this Trump campaign was motivated by fear, xenophobia, hatred, and a desire for answers that may or may not be there. So they're accusing you for being a stupid person, right? And actually, Sundar Pichai, who is the CEO of Google, he says that the company will develop machine learning and AI to combat what an employee described as misinformation said by low information voters. If you don't know who is the low information voters, it's you. Okay, so they think you're stupid. So whenever you see anything that they don't like as a news item, then you're not taking the right decision. You're not really informed yourself properly. And another term which I think goes hand in hand, and I think it was like a byproduct of fake news becoming a worldwide sensation as a term. It was the term fact-checking. And it was tied up to this fake news phrase. And this term was used over and over again during the presidential campaign, especially from the other side of the argument, Hillary Clinton. And this is the counteraction to the word fake news, because sometimes fake news are real news. So basically, Hillary Clinton was saying that you have to fact check everything that the fake news movement is saying. That includes Donald Trump. So this term was thrown around wildly and used as a weapon by Hillary and her supporters, and it was becoming increasingly more clear that they were losing the war to the information war. A war that has been fought throughout the ages and will be fought as long as liberty lovers are willing to take a stand for what is right. So they began to use this term, fact-checking, because it was becoming glaringly obvious that the once mighty mainstream media was losing its grip over the masses. Okay, and here is a thing about a minute-long exchange between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton that is using this term over and over.
Because everything he just said is absolutely false, but I'm not surprised. Really? In the first debate,
the audience needs to calm down here.
I told people that it would be impossible to be fact-checking Donald all the time. I'd never get to talk about anything I want to do and how we're going to really make lives better for people. So once again, go to HillaryClinton.com. We have literally Trump. You can fact-check him in real time. Last time at the first debate, we had millions of people fact-checking, so I expect we'll have millions more fact-checking because, you know, it's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Okay, so basically what it is to fact-checking is basically ignore the truth. So this the marginally won by the Republicans elections was a reality check for these corrupt media corporations. So what can be done? The idea of what sort of response is needed are as numerous as they're varied. On one side, more than a few call for government intervention on social media sites, arguing that the big tech giants have become monopolies. They call to have governments intervene was loud and clear from US Congress and EU Commission. It was hypocritical, really, because they tried to intervene in a way that will inhibit our rights of freedom of speech. But I think this Internet Bill of Rights that has become a new thing recently, I think it will somehow safeguard some of these rights online. And if that could go ahead, maybe we could have some, if you like, wall of protection of what they're trying to do. So just to briefly go through these 10 different rights of, you probably had them before, they have already been implemented, some of them in some degree, some others they haven't. So the first one is to have access to and knowledge of all collection and uses of personal data by companies. And of course we know that the past couple of years we had this problem where companies collect information without your consent. Okay. Another one is to obtain consent to the collection of personal data by any party and to the sharing of personal data with a third party. A third one is where context appropriate with a fair process to obtain, correct or delete personal data controlled by any company and to have these requests honored by third parties. A fourth one is to have personal data secured and to be notified in a timely manner when a security breach or unauthorized access of personal data is discovered. Another one is, which I'm really, I would like to see that being implemented, is to move all personal data from one network to the other without any hassle, because you can't do that these days. Okay, I have personal experience that people will not remove my data from their database, and although I have requested that, this is not yet a right. It's very vague the way the law is touching that at the moment. The sixth one is to access and to use the internet without internet service providers blocking, throttling, engaging in paid prioritization, or otherwise unfairly favoring content application services or devices. The seventh one is to internet service without the collection of data that is unnecessary for providing the requested service absent opt-in consent. The ninth one is not to be unfairly discriminated against or exploited based on your personal data. And the 10th one is to have an entity that collects your personal data, have reasonable business practices and accountability to protect your privacy, because we don't see this thing at the moment. And remember the 1984 book, which it's a classic now, from George Orwell. But back then, in this dystopian, futuristic society, they had the Ministry of Truth. And the Ministry of Truth, its purpose was to dictate and protect the government's version of reality. And I think that's where the future we're heading to at the moment. Okay, a future where the government, the big government, would dictate what your reality is and what the news that they want you to see is your reality. And interestingly enough, this book, for this reason, was banned in Russia during the years of the Soviet Union. Because, of course, the Russians saw the connection that because readers perceived the novel as an allegory for their own repressive regimes at the time. So it was a serious crime to distribute information defaming the Soviet social and political system, a bit like the society we're heading to at the moment. And such criminal laws were widely used by the Kremlin to silence dissidents, human rights activists, religious movements and groups fighting for independence in the Soviet republics. So similar laws were on the books in Eastern Germany, Poland and other Eastern Bloc countries. And thankfully today, so far, we have democracies that this landscape is, we haven't reached this place yet, but these echoes of these regimes, of these oppressive regimes, they are louder and louder as the time goes by. And I will close with this observation that what is the era we live after fake news? That the media are not a complex collection of independent agencies holding the system into account as they used to be, but an elite-directed component of that system. And this idea has now moved into the public consciousness, and fake news is another popular term that the ruling global elite will try to exploit in order to further erode our rights to free, unbiased news and information. So I hope with my presentation I shed a little light over fake news and how they try to prohibit free speech. Thank you very much.